We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 77 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swaddling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalist. Mike, how you doing?
All right, Dan. Yes, good. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. It's getting a bit colder these days, and the nights are drawing in. So yeah, it gets a bit miserable this time of year. But hopefully the party season will be starting soon. So that'll cheer me up a little bit. So Mike, what are we talking about today?
So this podcast very much focused on the US midterm elections. So we're looking at the congressional results, some of the governorship races. What does it mean for the 2024 presidential election? And just some general interesting election results from the US more widely.
Yes, so it was a big round of congressional midterms. We were told this was going to be a referendum on Biden's leadership as president, and you know, the level of inflation and what have you. And the state of the US economy, and all the pundits, or most of the pundits, were saying there was going to be a red wave of Republican victories in the Senate and in the Congress, and Biden was going to take one heck of a beating, as they say. Red wave seems to have turned into something of a trickle. Mike, what on earth's happened?
Well, this is it. Now, midterm elections, it's often worth noting, tend to go against the incumbent president. Trump lost his midterms, as he normally does. And in fact, as you look back, with one exception, every president has lost seats in their first midterms. They've not necessarily lost control of the House, but they've lost seats in the first midterms. Everyone all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt, with the exception of George Bush Jr. And that was, of course, in the wake of 9/11. So that was perhaps a bit of a one-off kind of scenario. So you expect the Dems to lose, and they did. And it's worth noting that despite what the way the BBC and many others are reporting this, the Dems have lost ground, broadly speaking, during these elections, but only broadly speaking. And it is fair to say you would really expect them to lose more ground than they have, much like in the UK, where local elections tend to be a referendum and tend to go against the incumbent government. That's the result we were expecting, but frankly, it just didn't go very much against them at all.
No, it doesn't seem to have. From what we can see, it seems that the Democrats are going to keep control of the Senate, or at the very least, it looks like the Vice President Kamala Harris will at least be in a position to have a casting vote on anything that gets to the Senate. Albeit it does look as if the Republicans might get a narrow majority in the Congress. So that will be interesting to see if we get that sort of gridlock situation that you sometimes get in US politics. From what I can see, some of the Congress people and some of the governors have been able to, some of the Democratic senators rather, have been able to talk about national issues, and rather than sort of things like abortion and what have you, and kind of turn it away from Biden's sort of general leadership and the things that have gone over the last couple of years, and perhaps in certain districts that's energized the Democratic voter base who might not otherwise have turned out in a midterm, and indeed in a midterm where no doubt they're struggling through the rate of inflation. So some interesting results there. But of course, it's not just the Congress and the Senate that have elections at this time of year. We also have the governorships, or the gubernatorial elections. It's a very interesting word that we've never ever used except in this one context. Mike, what's been the sort of the picture across the states in this regard?
Well, the Republicans have a lead in the number of governors over the Dems, not massive, a massive one, but in this particular election, the Republicans have lost a seat and the Democrats have gained one, or have gained that seat. So there's not really much in it in terms of the governorships that it's swung. Republicans have had quite a big lead back from the days of Barack Obama, and Barack Obama, for being a hugely popular presidential candidate, had very short coattails, as they call it, and was very bad at getting people elected down ticket. And that's something the Republicans have built on, and arguably was a problem for them what was now 6 years ago, when Trump came through the middle of a lot of strong candidates. So it's an interesting thing with the US all US elections. Down ticket matters much more. You mentioned abortion there. It's interesting that's a national issue, and it certainly was reflected in voters' preferences. But of course, the Dobbs ruling by the Supreme Court really stopped it being a national issue and made it a local, a state issue. So, really important things like that, and that was the top item in voter responses, why they were voting on the exit polls, the second one being inflation, actually isn't a national issue anymore. It's been returned to the states for them to sort out.
Absolutely. So interesting to see how this all pans out. Looking again back at the senatorial race there, of course, Georgia is going to have a runoff. With Herschel Walker, the former NFL player, is in that. So we'll find that out in a few weeks' time. But yeah, so the red wave didn't occur. The Dems seem to have done better than they thought they were going to. So what does that mean for the next presidential election? Well, Trump was going around and claiming victory in advance and claiming that it was his brand of republicanism that was leading the way, and but it seems that some of the people that he particularly endorsed, and certainly some of the people who perhaps have been going around saying that the 2020 election result wasn't valid, even raising questions about that. They seem to have particularly underperformed. So it'll be interesting to see how Trump responds to that. People believe that if the Republicans did have the good night that they thought they were going to have, that Trump would be announcing his presidential candidacy imminently. I believe he's got something planned over the next few days, some sort of an announcement. But whether that goes ahead now is another matter. As we know, he was quite possible for him to claim victory if there's a victory, and to blame others if there's not. But one of the people that could be a presidential candidate for Republicans next time is Ron DeSantis down in Florida, the governor there, who's had a big win. It's going to be interesting, Mike.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis has really proven that if you govern well, people tend to vote for you. And it's interesting talking about some of the Trump candidates. By all accounts, the majority of candidates that Trump endorsed won, and he in one level he had a good night when you look at it and a purely numbers thing. But on another level, as you've said, and as indeed lots of people are saying, the trouble is he nominated some people who were just a bit too fringe for what they call purple districts, sort of fairly split between Democrats and Republicans, to really go on and win it. So he was endorsing quite extreme, and I don't really like to use that word, quite strong Republican candidates for areas where perhaps a softer candidate would have had more chance of winning. Ron DeSantis is often seen as quite a strong candidate, but he's actually done his job, and guess what? People have enjoyed it and voted for it. And it's really interesting to contrast some of the elections in Florida. When DeSantis was first elected, he sort of basically squeaked over the line at 49.6% of the vote to his Democrat opponent getting 49.2% of the vote. Now, that was 4 years ago. And scroll forward to now with Ron's governorship through COVID, and he wins a whopping 59.4% of the vote against the Democrats on 40%. He's absolutely, really proven his mettle in Florida. But it's not just what it's done for him. If you look what's arguably down ticket, I'm not sure you can call a Senate race down ticket, but Marco Rubio's coming with 57.7% of the vote. Now, his election last time was 6 years ago, where he got 52% of the vote. And 4 years ago, the other senator for the state, Senator Rick Scott, only just got over 50% of the vote. So Ron DeSantis has not just done well for himself, he's done well down ticket for the Republicans. And that's a really, really important thing in the longer term for the state, and actually suggests he would be a really good candidate, not just as a presidential candidate potentially, but as a candidate that leads the party writ large. And that's an important thing. Of course, why has he done well? I talk about his governorship, and I think definitely people are moving to Florida. They're moving away from some of the Democrat states where taxes are high. They're moving to low tax Florida. They're moving for the sunshine. But also, he's really picked up a lot of the Hispanic vote. And of course, in America, they do talk about race a lot by votes. And Florida generally, and particularly because of the Cubans and Venezuelans there, is much, much more likely to, so the Hispanics are much, much more likely to vote Republican. And that's really paid off for them.
Absolutely. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether DeSantis decides to keep his powder dry, or whether he decides to take on Trump. I mean, for the Republican Party, I sort of think, well, maybe Trump's had his day, and maybe he needs to step aside, and it might be for the better for them. But obviously, the sort of guy he is, he may not be able to see that for himself.
It's interesting seeing Mike Pence has now come out fairly critically of Donald Trump. There's a few other people lining up against him. He could graciously bow out, and if he could spend time endorsing candidates, raising money for people, he would go down well. But as you say, the sort of candidate he is, it's not clear he's going to do that. The other thing, there could be some stalking horse candidates. I think there's a couple of candidates that I think are interesting to look at from the Republican side that could challenge and either could work with Trump as vice presidential candidates, or work well to kind of booster a DeSantis campaign, or who knows what it will be. But Nikki Haley has clearly been lining her up. She's the former governor of South Carolina. She's also the former US ambassador to the UN, and she was appointed by Donald Trump for that role. She's a really interesting candidate. She has worked incredibly hard in the last 4 years to shake hands with every Republican running everywhere in every state, from what I can work out from her Twitter feed. She's got a lot of people owe her favors for getting elected by having what's a big name come to some quite small races. And I think, she will have a lot of support if she were to run. And the person that's, I think, is quite exciting to hear, and the person I think will be really interesting for anyone that watches US elections, is Larry Elder's talking about putting together a campaign. Now, Larry Elder is a former talk show host, and I must admit, I was once a subscriber, an El Dorado, to the Sage of South Central, as he's known. He ran for governor of California in the recall election about a year ago now. he didn't do particularly well. It's a Democratic state. A Republican never does well in California, but he has a lot to say. African American candidate, just really interesting. A talk show host, a writer. He comes across incredibly well, and if he runs, trust me, you're going to enjoy watching it.
Yes, it's interesting. You mentioned the sort of the ethnic voting patterns, particularly in Florida, but it's noticeable, according to the sort of the polling experts. One particular group that seems to have voted overwhelmingly for the Democrats on this occasion are unmarried women.
I feel like there's a real chance of me bursting into a Beyonce number here. All the single ladies have very much voted for the Democrats, and it's a little comparison for listeners on this. In the US, the numbers between men and women really kind of is quite different. So married men broke Republican by 20 points. Married women broke Republican by 14 points. Unmarried men broke Republican by 7 points, but unmarried women broke Democrat by 37 points. And unmarried women were just a law unto themselves. I'm not sure I can get away with saying that anymore. But in terms of voting, it was a really big difference for the Democrats. Now, how does that break down if you take away the marriage factor? Men voted Republican 56 to 42 Democrat. Women voted Democrat 53 to 45 Republican. Just as a comparison to the 2019 election here in the UK, men voted Conservatives 46 to 31, and obviously we've got more parties here. And women voted Conservative 44 to 35. So like America, women are more likely to vote for the left-wing party. Men are more likely to vote for the right-wing party. But nothing like the gap we've seen in America. Really, it just sort of emphasized the polarization and, if you like, the specialization of the vote they get in America. Republicans, I don't know how they're going to move to get the unmarried female vote trend more towards them. There is some talk of trying to encourage women to get married so they vote Republican, but I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that.
No, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks as to whether Trump does announce and how he gets on with the unmarried women, as we say. It's an interesting thing. Well, we've talked there about the future presidential election. We've talked about the gubernatorial elections and indeed, of course, the congressional midterms. But this is America we're talking about, and they have elections for almost everything. And they've had some elections for school boards and all kinds of ballot initiatives across the country. Mike, are there any that you've picked out?
Yeah, mentioned earlier the Supreme Court ruling on abortion and the effect that's had, and that does seem to have been a turning point in favor of the Democrats and against the Republicans in this race, and maybe just it energized the Democrat base and perhaps slightly suppressed the Republican base because abortion had now been opened as a democratic issue rather than a constitutional issue. Now, I think most Republicans will say, actually, they will take the Dobbs ruling any day of the week over a few more House members. So I don't think that's a particularly big issue for them. But it's interesting now. It's being returned to the states. Guess what? Different states can bring in different measures. They can do what they want to do. So in California, much as you might expect in California, Proposition 1 adds the right to abortion and contraception use to the state constitution. So at a state level, California has effectively chosen to put the rulings of Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey into their constitution. Now that's fine. That's the way it's meant to be done in a democratic measure like that, not just frankly made up out of whole cloth by the Supreme Court. So They've done that, but 5 states overall have added pro-abortion measures into their constitutions at a local level. And I suspect we will see with the new houses and senates in a state level being elected, a similar kind of response from certain Republican states if they won. So it's just quite interesting. Also out of California, Proposition 31 upheld a state law barring the sale of flavored tobacco. Now, this is quite a pernicious vote, I feel. I mean, they voted for it. That's democracy. It won overwhelmingly by 62.8% of the vote. This is basically stopping vaping, flavored vaping in California. It was paid for in large part by Bloomberg. The goal. Now, over here in the UK, we have seen vaping really take off and really reduce the amount of cigarette smoking that particularly the young have done. You might not like vaping, you might not want them to vape, but there's definitely been at least a correlation and probably a causation between youngsters smoking flavored vape things and not smoking cigarettes. I think most of us would agree that's a good thing. Certainly they're not smoking cigarettes. In California, they've decided to hell with that. We're gonna legalize marijuana and ban vaping. I know which side of that fence I'll be on, but as I say, that's the oddities of American democracy. Just a couple more things, if I may. Dan, school boards, I think, are really interesting in the States. Despite the red wave not happening at a national level, at a local level, a lot of school boards have switched over to the Republicans, and there's been quite a big kickback in America against some of the school board elections. Something called the 1776 Project claims it has officially flipped 100 school boards since November last year, winning in a number of areas. This week, at least 9 school boards in at least 6 states were flipped from Democrat to Republican. And this is all about the culture wars, and it's all about, frankly, indoctrination of children that sometimes goes on in American schools. I would say it doesn't happen in this country to the same extent because of the national curriculum we have here. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, but just to the same extent. But in America, it's really become a polarizing issue, and it's interesting that Republicans have been able to make headway on that. I can't help but feel if they could stop talking about stolen elections and focus on issues like that, they may have done better at a national level. But Dan, there was one candidate, before we come on to some dead heats, there was one candidate that I think you might identify with. Do you want to tell us about something in the Alabama Treasury?
I do. I mean, I'm perhaps a little bit old for this now, but yes, the Alabama treasurer has been re-elected, and his name is Young Boozer, which is a tremendous name for the treasurer of a state, and a Republican, of course. So,
and a Republican. Did you note the irony in the name of Young Jacob Boozer III, to give him his full name?
No, go on.
He's 73.
I'm sure he is. I mean, you're only young once.
You're only young once, indeed. Interestingly, he ran against a libertarian, and those that follow us regularly will know we have some interest with the Libertarian Party over here. Well, the Libertarian Party in the US is quite big. Young Boozer beat out the Libertarian. There's no way anyone's trusting the Democrats with the Treasury. But the Libertarians more generally, it's really hard to see how they've done. They've run in quite a few places. They have got some people elected. They got a statewide role in Nebraska, which was to do with a lower loop NRD. I've looked it up and I was none the wiser when I read it. A number of city council people elected, school board people. The Bayview Water and Sewer Board got someone elected to. So they have got people elected to different seats. What's slightly worrying for them, or not ideal for them, is you really have to dig on their website to see who they've been elected. There's no celebration of getting people elected. It's not a great sign for the Libertarian Party, I would say. But but there is a third party at least, and they are getting some people elected.
Indeed. Well, that's enough from the other side of the pond for now. Mike, what have we got on our website that might be of interest to the listeners?
Yeah, so I ironically going back to the US, I was in the US earlier in the year, watching the USA play soccer, the USA men's team, as they call it. One of the things that really struck me was the unabashed patriotism of the Americans, and I wrote an article on that. It's previously been published in Blacklist Press, but is now up on our website. It might be of interest, gives you a bit of a background to soccer in the US, but more about the patriotism and how really saw people come together out there. Have a read and let me know your thoughts.
Well, if you'd like to write for our website or have any stories you'd like us to cover, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter @CroydonConst, via Facebook, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. Well, thank you very much to everybody for listening. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay free, everybody.